Hello, everyone. Hello, aviators. Hello, flight controllers, flight attendants from all over the world. My name is Rai Cardoso, and this is one more English for Aviation live streaming. And today, our focus is on learning a method so you can be successful on the ICAO test or on any aviation test, any pilot test or ATC test or job interview. And the point today is do not memorize words, memorize sentences, memorize full sentences. For instance, just to begin with, if I say to you landing gear and show you the picture, or maybe if I show you a real landing gear and I ask you to memorize this big thing, right? Okay, what's the use of only memorizing the words landing and gear? Just a bunch of words means nothing. So the same amount of energy you are going to employ or you are going to apply to memorize landing gear, you should use the same amount of energy to memorize a full context or context, with full meaning, a full sentence. And moving on, for instance, if I ask you to memorize landing gear lever, then you have to memorize landing, then after this, what means gear, then what means lever, right? Lever. Then you are going to spend a lot of energy, right? Just to memorize a bunch of words that have no meaning. That is not a context, right? So instead of doing this, how about memorizing, instead of only landing gear or lever or whatever, the pilot put the landing gear lever down. Oh, now we have a meaning, a context. Okay, so the point is do not memorize words, memorize sentences, memorize uh, a sentence full of a context with a meaning. And again, the pilot put the landing gear lever up. Okay, so instead of only memorizing landing gear and landing gear lever, memorize the pilot put the landing gear lever. Now imagine that if before, okay, using a full sentence like this, you had to memorize word by word, first pilot, then the verb to put, then landing gear, then what means lever and what means up. Okay, like when you learned in the past, when you were a child, your mother tongue, what did you do? You memorized sentences, contexts, not only words. It doesn't make any sense. And here, let's expand a bit. The pilot put the landing gear lever down. The pilot put the landing gear lever down. You are memorizing a context, okay, full of meaning. And the landing gear was deployed, right? Or the landing gear was dropped or even was lowered. It doesn't matter. But now, instead of only memorizing landing and landing gear and the verb to be in the uh, simple past, right? And the verb to deploy or to drop, whatever, you are memorizing a context. You are memorizing a sentence, and it's useful. It makes sense, right? Or again, still, the pilot put the landing gear lever up instead of memorizing pilot and the verb to put and landing gear and what it means lever, what means up. The pilot put the landing gear lever up, and what happened? And the landing gear was retracted. Again, before uh, memorizing, instead of memorizing landing, that can be a verb or it also can be a noun, like a landing gear. Memorizing this and seeing the picture, memorize a context or a context, because memorizing just a bunch of words, this is bullshit and it's useless, totally useless. So the pilot put the landing gear lever up. The pilot put the landing gear lever up. It's more useful than only memorizing the pilot, then the following the landing gear, just a piece, just a part of an aircraft, right? So memorize a picture, like a movie. So, and the landing gear was retracted. Let's move on. Other word, runway. Then normally in the schools, people show a runway and is going to explain this is the place where the aircraft land and blah 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 blah. Runway. This is the portion of the airport paved to receive the aircraft on their landings, on their approach, and the place where they land. Right, like defining, giving a definition or synonyms for this. It's totally useless. Let's say context for this. So instead of memorizing only runway, okay, it's useless. Only runway is useless on an interview, IQ test, whatever. So you can memorize the aircraft overran the runway, okay? The aircraft overran the runway because the runway was slippery or whatever, because the runway was wet. Now you have a context or a context, right? You occupy the portion of your brain to store a context, right? To store a full sentence, not only the verb, the word runway or aircraft, and what slippery means, because you are visualizing. You are visualizing, right? So the aircraft overran the runway because the runway was slippery. Imagine before saying this, if you had to um, understand and memorize the verb to be, right, in the simple past, to say was. So if I say the aircraft overran the runway because the runway was slippery or because the runway was wet, now it makes sense. And you are using your storage space on your brain to memorize a sentence, a context, right? And it really makes sense. And you can also use like other resources, like a musical approach. For instance, if it's too big to you, like, why did the aircraft overrun the runway? The aircraft overran the runway because the runway was wet, right? Or because it was slippery. Normally, I use when it's a tongue twister. Understand, tongue twister, twister, like very difficult to memorize and say everything as a whole. And normally, I use myself. I use like music, and I create a, because there is a like a music in every sentence, and you just have to find out. So I use this like for this big sentence that can confuses us. I like using this. Why did the aircraft overrun the runaway? Why did the aircraft overrun the runaway? The aircraft overran the runaway because the runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. The aircraft overran the runaway because the runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. Why did the aircraft overrun the runaway? Why the aircraft overrun the runaway? The aircraft overran the runaway because the runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. The runaway was wet. So it makes sense to me and it works to me. Find a way and use it. Uh, it can be beneficial if it makes sense to you. So now, after saying it as a song, it's easier to memorize. That's it for today. That's all. I expect to see you again on our next classes, on our next lessons. Our lessons, Clear to Climb lessons, we are launching it within maybe 6 months and expect to be launching it soon. So bye bye. Take care. Merry Christmas. See you. Bye.